Hi, my name is Stan.
My name is Connie.
My name is Judy.
My name is Eileen, and I'm a caregiver to my mother.
And I care for my mother, Octavia.
And I'm a caregiver for my mother.
And I'm a caregiver to my husband, Art.
I'm a caregiver for my wife, Ann, who's 72 years old.
Basically, I've done everything for providing for both of them.
I take care of my mother on the weekends. I take her grocery shopping.
Not only household chores,
I provide her medical care, coordination, driving, errands.
choosing meals, making meals, cleaning up.
I find that I take care of anything that he can't take care of.
Sometimes I find balancing time a real challenge.
The difficult part for me is taking me into consideration.
Balancing her needs with the needs of my family, the needs of my marriage, and my own needs.
Staying calm, nice, and positive.
The real challenge is, of course, the distance and the moment you get that last phone call.
What I love most about taking care of her is knowing that we're providing a secure and comfortable home for her.
It's the time we spend together.
Is the adventure of finding out new things all the time to trying to help him stay out of pain.
My name is Ed. I'm a spouse and I'm a caregiver.
My name is Colette. I'm a daughter and a caregiver.
I'm a caregiver, and I'm a daughter.
And I'm a wife and a caregiver.
I'm a daughter and a caregiver.
I'm a son, a nephew, and a caregiver.
Hi, my name is Deborah Day, and I help manage United Way Caregivers Coalition. While caring for a loved one has its special rewards, it's a very challenging job. It can be stressful, overwhelming, and sometimes lonely. Each caregiving situation is unique, but all caregivers share the need for information and support. And that's where the Caregivers Coalition comes in. We help caregivers receive the support they need to take care of their loved ones and to take care of themselves. Caregivers who lead healthy, productive lives will be better caregivers. The most important thing to remember is that as a caregiver, you're not alone. Tonight we're doing a program. Our program is going to be presented by Shana Siegel, who's a certified elder law attorney with WanderPolo Siegel in Montclair. Shana does estate planning, elder law, and special needs law, working with individuals and families across northern New Jersey.
Hi, everybody. So I have a lot of information to cover, so I'm going to try and run through, and then as we have questions at the end. It's been a very busy period for Medicaid in New Jersey over the last couple of years, but particularly over the last, I'd say, 9 months. In late 2012 is when the comprehensive Medicaid waiver was approved. And I guess I wrote an article for a national law journal back in 2011 and kind of talking about that. And then 2012 passed, and then here we go into, it's been taking a lot of time to actually implement it, delays, and Medicaid was trying to get their act together. And, but here we are, we're finally in the implementation phase. It's been since the summer with some of the things that we're talking about, and then since December with the others. So we're starting to sort of see the patterns of what's been happening. So we'll be able to talk about that a little bit. So the first question, what is a comprehensive waiver? What is that all about? And why is it important to us, right? It is very important and a worthy in concept. So from a sort of public policy oriented point of view, which is where I sort of come in historically, it makes a lot of sense. Medicaid's costs have been skyrocketing. Medicaid is spending $5 billion a year in New Jersey for provision of services. And the goal of the comprehensive waiver, which I'll run through in detail, is to streamline the services, to make it all one system. So we had 8 different waiver programs with all different rules and different entry points and different criteria, and it was really confusing. And so the idea was to be able to make it easier for people, make it so that there was no, what we call no wrong door access. So you would, if you weren't qualified for one thing, you would be told that you were qualified for another, so you didn't have that kind of place where you just feel like you hit a roadblock. And so the goal was to streamline, to improve efficiency, improve effectiveness, and of course cost savings, right? And one of the major ways of doing that is in and of itself a great goal, what we all want, which is to be able to be in the home and the community, right? Nobody wants to be in a facility if they don't have to be, in a nursing home, not a wonderful assisted living like this, but in a nursing home. But that wasn't always possible, and that was causing a lot of problems with people, not just they weren't getting what they wanted, but it was also costing Medicaid a lot of money. So that was the idea behind the comprehensive waiver. Let's bring everything together, let's make it easier for people to apply, and let's keep more people at home. And one of the things you have to understand in terms of why we had such high costs is that in order to get long-term care services, in a nursing home, you could have as much income as you wanted. Okay, so if you had a pension and you had Social Security, and so your total income was, let's say, $4,000, you were only eligible to receive long-term care services through Medicaid in a nursing home setting. You couldn't come and live here, and you couldn't get Medicaid at home. Well, what does that do? That forces people who don't need to be in a nursing home to go into a nursing home. And that's what we were seeing all the time. People who were either trying to put together ways to privately pay because they desperately didn't want to go into a nursing home, or they were having to do that because otherwise they couldn't have Medicaid coverage. So that was a big problem with the system. And the idea of the comprehensive waiver was aimed at fixing that. One of the other pieces that's in the comprehensive waiver is managed care. So the theory behind managed care is that it incentivizes the providers and the insurers to control costs. So in this case, there would be a capitated rate, and the insurers would have an incentive to provide services at the least expensive rate, and that, in theory, saves money. Well, we all know how well managed care has worked out in the private setting, but that there has been a huge movement nationwide to move Medicaid into managed care, and that has been done in outside of long-term care many years ago. New Jersey Medicaid has moved to a managed care setting many years ago, but it had not rolled out into long-term care services. So when you were doing your long-term care services, you were getting it through regular fee-for-service. The nursing home was getting paid, but that's no longer going to be the case. Okay, so I want to just sort of give a quick overview of how the system was working previously, and then we'll get into kind of how it was working, how it works now. So as I mentioned, we had a situation where if you needed long-term care Medicaid, so if you needed the services of an aide or you needed other custodial care in a nursing home setting, then you could get that at home through a program that was called Global Options. You could get it in an assisted living, also through Global Options, or you could get and you could have higher income if you were in a nursing home. Okay, so you could either be lower income or higher income in a nursing home. And that program for when you had the higher income was called Medically Needy. Correctly, they saw that this was costing a lot of money, and they decided to eliminate that under the new program. So the problem is if you have $4,000 a month of income, okay, and it was easy in a nursing home to say, okay, well, almost all of that income, unless you have a spouse that's out in the community, basically all that income can be cost shared towards the facility. So if I have $4,000, I'm going to put it's essentially all going to go to the facility. I'm going to get a very small amount for my personal needs allowance, and the rest is going to go to the facility. And then Medicaid is going to pay the differential above that care. So if the care costs $10,000, I've got $4,000, then Medicaid's going to be paying $6,000. It's a little bit more complicated when you have somebody in the community. If they're going to have a larger income and they're going to be in the community and receiving Medicaid, well, what then happens with that income? And that's where the new program, which is not, it is implemented in some other states. This program that is called a Miller Trust or a Qualified Income Trust is the new provision. So with the Qualified Income Trust, what happens is that you can now, in a nursing home or in the community, receive services through Medicaid no matter what your income is. But there has to be a way to figure out what's going to happen to that income, okay? So the program that was developed was that now all of the income, or not necessarily all of it, but an amount over a certain, what was previously the income cap. So an amount over, this year, $21.99, is going to go into a trust. You have to first create a trust, okay? So if I'm going to apply for Medicaid, all right, I've spent my money down, I'm now ready to make an application for Medicaid. I have to create a trust. Now, when I say a trust, it is a trust, but it's not what you might think of in terms of, a 30-page document that is, very complex. This is a much more simple trust. Income of the Medicaid applicant has to be placed into this trust. This trust states what the priorities are of how the funds have to be spent every month, and that is set by regulation. And then, as for the particular person, how it's set, it is then applied by the Medicaid agency. So the Medicaid agency will say, okay, you have $3,000, you are going into a nursing home, so you're allowed to keep this amount, or if you're going into an assisted living, you're allowed to keep this amount. They're going to look, do you have people who are dependent on you? So that's where a spouse might come in. So if I have $3,000 of income, they may say, okay, I'm allowed to take some of that income and allocate it to my spouse. And the next thing they're going to look at is, are there unreimbursed medical expenses? So if you say to them, I have things that weren't covered, that were, over the last several months, you can then, this is new, you can now say, I would like these things to be able to be paid out of the trust first before I get to the portion that I have to pay over to the agency. So you can request that. Medicaid will say yes or no and deal with that, and then you will get to the cost share portion, which is the portion that has to be paid to the facility if you're in a facility, or if you're in the community, it gets paid directly to Medicaid, okay? So you're still going to have a cost share, but they're going to calculate out, and there's a little bit of a benefit here that you can potentially get some of your income allocated to pre-existing medical expenses. Now, I was involved in, from the advocacy side of trying to increase the number of things that we could get allowable deductions. And we went back and forth with Medicaid. I did a whole analysis for them of what states were doing what and, who was allowing various other things. So we are hoping that they will expand that list, but as of right now, that's where they're standing in terms of what the list of things that are allowable. So what things didn't I talk about that might be relevant if you're opening a trust? I didn't talk about attorney's fees. You cannot pay attorney's fees out of the income. I did not talk about bank fees. There is some confusion about the bank fees piece because the state is saying a little bit different things. It appears that they will allow you to have $20 a month in bank fees because, right, you're establishing an account with this trust, right? You're going to take your income, and you are going to you're going to open up an account in the name of this trust, and each month the income will be paid directly into that trust instead of being paid to the facility or being paid into your own bank account. And then the things that have to be paid, those deductions, will be paid out of the trust. So you have to have a bank account, right? Normally there are fees, there are minimum balances. You're not going to have in this a sustained balance, because essentially every month that money is going to come in and it's going to come right back out. So that's a problem. We're having a lot of banks that are refusing to accept these trusts. So this is an implementation issue that we're having. One of the things that we did get with the state when we were working and advocating is that they will, after 6 months, they're going to do a review on this, see what's working and what isn't, and then see how they need to tweak it. Because, as I said, we're already within 2 months, we're already having issues of a lot of banks don't want to have anything to do with these accounts. Some of the other pitfalls that we're seeing in terms of this is you have to be able to set up this trust. So that means that either the Medicaid applicant themselves has to have the capacity to sign a trust and open up a bank account with it, or they have to have a legal guardian or a power of attorney. Well, not every Medicaid applicant has those things. Some of them don't have people who are their power of attorney, but happen to be on their account or happen to be spouses, and who therefore would have been able to file a Medicaid application, but cannot, under the new rules, actually start a trust. So we advocated that this is going to be a problem. You're going to end up seeing a lot more guardianships. We'll see how that works out. Now, the next question is, who can run the trust? There has to be a trustee. It cannot be the beneficiary themselves. So there has to be somebody who is financially responsible, who will take on the responsibility of monitoring this account, having the money come in, send the checks out, and most importantly, making sure that the account never builds up. Now, in most cases, that isn't going to happen because, as I said, you're going to have a cost share amount, and it's going to be calculated to maximize what your contribution is. However, when we get to talking about the other piece, the managed care piece, if you're in a community and you are receiving kind of not a huge amount of services, it could be that your cost share, because your cost share is based on what services you're receiving, could be not so large, so that you would, at the end of the month, have money left over in the account. Well, you're not allowed to spend it on very many things. So how do you then make sure that that money is used and doesn't build up? Because it is income in the month that it is placed in there, but it becomes a resource the next month. And we all know that you can't have more than $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month in assets for Medicaid purposes, unless you're a community spouse. That's a different, there's a spouse in the community that's different. But you can see how very easily you can have trouble that this account creeps up and you now have made yourself ineligible for Medicaid. So that's another problem that we're going to see. We're also going to see a problem with just the management of it, because one of the things I said is you do not necessarily have to put all of your income in. You can keep out of the trust an amount as long as it doesn't exceed that former income cap that we had. We used to have an income cap in 2014. It was $2163, so you could qualify for Medicaid in the community if you were below $2163. So they've put that as the threshold. If you had income below $2163 per month, then you wouldn't have to do this whole process. And if you do have income above it, you only have to put the income in above $2163. However, almost all advocates are saying that you really should be putting all of your income in it, because otherwise you could potentially have a cost share where you're having to take some of the money out of the trust and some of the money out of a personal account, and you're trying to then manage different accounts. It can be very confusing. The other rule is that you have to put in all of one source of income. So let's say that I have Social Security of $2,000 and then I have a pension of $1,000. Well, you have to put your whole pension in. You can't just put the amount that made you go over that threshold. So essentially it just becomes very cumbersome to have, my Social Security is in this account and then my pension is in my QIT account and I'm trying to, it's just very complex. So that's why we have that situation where we recommend that you do it all in one place. You have to set up these trusts prior to eligibility, so it has to be done before you can become eligible for benefits. Now, one of the things is you can actually pay trustee fees. So let's say that you have a niece or a nephew or someone who's going to be the trustee, not, maybe not a child or a spouse, and you want to be able to pay them a small fee to do this for you. You could do that if it was someone else in your family, not if you were going to do it for a child. But I'm just thinking that you might particularly want to do it if it was somebody who was not in your immediate family. And the problem is you can only pay a trustee fee if you have money left over after the cost share, and it's limited to 6% of income. So, and of course it's limited to whatever's left over there. So there aren't going to be that many opportunities where there's going to be money left in the account at the end of the month. You end up in a situation where it's just very, maybe there's $20 left, and so that's the fee that this person would do. So if you don't have a family member, it's going to be very hard to get someone to act as trustee. That was one of the issues that we also raised with the state, that who's going to do this? Elder law attorneys are not going to want to serve as trustees. Banks aren't going to want to serve as trustees. Where do you get, we talked about maybe the Office of Public Guardian would do it, and they said, no way, we have too many things as it is. So that's something that I think the state is really going to have to grapple with. What happens when we don't have family? Not everyone has wonderful caregivers that are around to handle these issues. So that's going to be a big issue. If there is money at the end of the trust, when the person passes away, New Jersey must be named as the remainder beneficiary, which of course the facilities don't love, because you could have a situation where people haven't paid, and then even the income and the cost share that they were supposed to pay, and then now all of a sudden everything that's left has to go back to the beneficiary. So it can be back to the state as the beneficiary. So that's a little dicey. The one thing to know is if you have a family member who is already on Medicaid in a facility, they do not have to worry about this for now. They're grandfathered in. The problem is that if they leave a facility and they want to come into a new one, or they come off of Medicaid, we see that all the time, right? Somebody had a home, they went on to Medicaid, then the home sold and they come off of Medicaid, or they get a small inheritance and they come off of Medicaid. Happens all the time. When you then would go back onto Medicaid, then you would have to create one of these trusts. So, and the other change that we're seeing is when we had the program in nursing homes where there was what we called medically needy, where you could have the higher income threshold, so you could have $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month in income. The asset limit was also higher. It was $4,000. So those people who then lose their eligibility and are going to have to go into this, they're also going to have to bring those assets down. They're going to have to spend down to $2,000. So we've got that issue as well. So a lot going on with the trust piece. There is a template trust on the Medicaid website. There are a frequently asked questions document on the Medicaid website. The temptation, of course, is to want to do the template and just do it yourself. The problem is with all of the trust is fairly simple. But it's all of the implementation stuff around it that makes it complex. And I think that's where, getting some help really can kind of make sense. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to actually ask if there are any questions regarding the trust before I get into the managed care component of the speech. The question is there a maximum amount that goes into the trust? The only place that a maximum would apply would be in your eligibility. So if you have $10,000 a month in income, you're not going to be Medicaid eligible because you have more income than Medicaid would be paying to the facility. But within that amount, as long as you're below the Medicaid, top threshold, then it could be $9,000. But you have to understand, and I have clients who have $6,000 or $7,000 in income, but the bulk of that, unless some of it is going to a community spouse, which often it is, the bulk of it is still going to go to cost share just the way it did in the old system. Okay? So previously, we were not seeing, at least in many elder law attorneys' client base, a lot of people were not qualifying for Medicaid for home and community-based services because they had more than $2,000 a month of income. Okay, you have Social Security, you had a good job, you probably, and so many people have pensions in that era, not now, but in that era, that it's very common to have more than $2,000 in income. So we have very few people on Medicaid of middle income people who were receiving home and community-based services. That was the problem, right? So now we have a situation where a lot of people are eligible, which is wonderful. I mean, that in and of itself, when we went through this whole thing in the elder law bar, are we going to support this or are we not? How can you not support it? I mean, so many of our clients now can receive benefits that they couldn't otherwise receive. They can stay at home, which is what, people desperately want to do. So that's a good thing. But what has happened as of July is that everyone who is receiving Medicaid, long-term care Medicaid, now has to enroll with a managed care entity. So that meant that there's 5 Medicaid managed care entities in the state, and I can give you what they are if you want. And those entities all are receiving a capitated rate for caring for individuals who received home and community-based services or people who are receiving long-term care in a nursing home. And their job is to keep those people in, obviously, receiving the most economical services that they can while still providing good care. So that's the Medicaid conundrum. Now, as we talked about in the past, people were grandfathered in who were in nursing homes. We have the same thing with the managed care setting, meaning that if you already are on Medicaid, okay, and you're in a nursing home, for right now, you can stay fee for service. So the nursing homes will continue to get paid just like they used to be paid for now. That's going to change. And there is this Medicaid built into the comprehensive waiver is a transition to the community plan, because the whole idea is we want to get people in the community, they like it better and it's cheaper. So we are going to be assessing and looking at everybody who's in nursing homes on Medicaid and seeing if we can serve them in the community. Is that good or bad? Kind of depends, right? I mean, you can see a situation where it's wonderful to be able to be in your home. You can also see a situation where you have a very stressed caregiver who is being pressured to keep someone at home that maybe they really shouldn't be keeping at home anymore. So you can see how that could really cut both ways. And again, we have those exceptions to the people who are grandfathered in. So if you're in a nursing home, don't think that you're dealing with this forever. If you were to ever leave, you ever wanted to go to a different nursing home, you ever come off of Medicaid, then you're going to be put into the managed care program as well. So what kind of services? What are the good parts? All right. So we have a managed care organization. You are enrolled in managed care, and you are assigned a case manager. And that case manager is going to come out and is going to do some planning for you as to what services you are entitled to. Now, the idea, again, behind this is wonderful. We have an idea of providing patient-centered planning. And that is actually, there's a new federal regulation out that deals with Medicaid home and community-based services, and it provides that you must engage, the providers and insurers must engage in patient-centered planning. That means the patient must be involved. They must be provided with options. You don't have to agree to what they say. They have to incorporate, and I just like the language, so I'm going to read it. Individually identified goals and preferences, encourage community participation, employment, healthcare, wellness, and education. So the goals are supposed to focus on that. That sounds just like Medicaid, doesn't it? That's exactly what they're doing. But that's what the regulations are requiring. So we will see how this is actually rolling out. As I said, it's only a few months now, so well, I will tell you what we are starting to see. We're starting to see people's hours be cut. So I have clients who were in the community and they were receiving 40 hours a week of care, and now with the managed care entity comes in and all of a sudden they want to cut their hours to 30 hours a week. So we're starting to see that lowering of services. On the good side, we are seeing a wider variety of services being covered. So in theory, how it should work is that these care managers they will have more tools in their tool chest of services that they can provide. So there are things that they can provide that weren't previously there. So home modification can now be paid for to a limited extent. Medical dispensing devices, okay? So you don't need to have a nurse, you don't need to have an aide or someone in the home because you're gonna have a box that's gonna automatically open. Transportation in some limited. So there's a lot of different kinds of things, which is good, except for where it's being limited to really, being used for the purpose of bringing down care. One important thing, I mentioned that we do have the Federal Register, a new federal rule. I also told you that we're seeing services being cut. The important thing is that the federal rule tells us that they cannot cut services. Doesn't matter if they're here we're talking about insurers, we're not talking about the state. They can't cut your services without going through the whole care planning process. So they really do need to have done those assessments in order to be able to say, and they have to do that, all of those touchy-feely words that I talked about, right? Individual preferences, individualized goals, all of those things are, under the federal law, required to be incorporated into the planning before they decide to lower services. There's things to encourage transition to the community. So if you had a loved one who is in a nursing home on Medicaid, let's say they just got Medicaid this month, so after this transition all happened, and they are pretty likely to get a visit from the care manager of their managed care entity saying, how would you like to think about moving home? And there's a real encouragement of trying to get people moved to home. And there is some good things, which are there's one-time costs built in. They'll give up to $5,000 to buy furniture or to pay security deposits or stuff like that. All, again, get people out of a facility, because how much does a nursing home cost? $10,000. At least, okay. And how much does being at home cost? 4, 5, 6. So in terms of the care component, maybe less. If we're talking about Medicaid, it may only be covering 40 hours a week, so it may be substantially less. So that's a big incentive for them to move people into communities. If Medicaid says we are going to pay for 40 hours, and we're going to talk about the tool, we decide that you only need 40 hours of services, Can someone else pay for it? Yes, someone else can pay for it. There are some limits to that, but generally the answer is yes. Someone else, not the applicant themselves, can pay for that extra care. One of the questions is, how is the whole, if people are in the community, how is the situation where you do have a spouse at home, how is that going to impact how many hours they think you need? So just to kind of step back, I've kind of mentioned and worked around it a little bit. If you apply for Medicaid and you're going to be in the community, you say, I want to stay at home, they're going to come out, a nurse is going to come out, and they're going to do an assessment. And they're going to ask you all kinds of questions of, can you do this by yourself, and can you do that by yourself? Well, first of all, think about how important it is for the caregiver to be there. Because if you ask my dad if he can do things by himself, yes, I can. But can he really? No way. So the first thing is, you want to be there as the caregiver when that person comes out so that you can be involved. You want to be at any meeting that those insurers have, anytime they're going to do any kind of assessments or they're going to talk about changes in services. So that's the first thing. So they come out and they say, they have a little list. Now there was a tool that used to, there's like 3 different tools in an evolution, and there's fights now over which tool they're using and whatever. It's more detail than you need. But the tool essentially goes to 40 hours a week, okay? So the maximum, they say, well, you can't prepare your own meal? Okay, that's 20 minutes. You can't prepare, you can't bathe yourself? That's 15 minutes. And they add it all up, and they come up with how many hours you're entitled to. When they come up with that number of hours, then that's how much you get. That's how much you can get up to, okay? Then the question is, are they going to take into account the fact that there's a spouse there or another caregiver who can provide some of that level of care? So that's something that traditionally we only saw that with parents of minor children. There was, if you needed 24-hour care, they would not pay for 24-hour care. They would pay for 16 hours, saying that the parent had to provide the one shift. 1 8-hour shift. And the question is, how much are we going to see that with this new implementation? So that'll be something to look out for. The Office of Community Choice is who does these assessments the first time. So that's a Medicaid agency. That's, I guess, good, because the next time on all the annuals, it's the insurer. It's the managed care company. And that's when it gets me really nervous. Of course, not that I don't think that the Medicaid agency has a vested interest, but the insurer certainly has a vested interest, right? Because they're getting, $7,000, and if they're only providing $5,000 of services, then they've got a bonus there. Of course, there's appeals processes and notice requirements and all of that, and it's really important to follow all of that closely. It's a little bit more complex when you have this new entity, this managed care entity, because there's the managed care appeal process and there's the Medicaid appeal process. You do not want to get stuck just in the managed care appeal process and miss your deadlines on the Medicaid appeal process. So you really want to do both, or just do the Medicaid, because you know how insurance goes, right? You have to get 4 denials before somebody's actually paying attention and listening, and then maybe you'll get an acceptance. So, that in and of itself is quite an issue. Okay, most important thing, and then I will break. So what happens if I need 40 hours of care, I need all these other services, and then the managed care company is going to look at how much all of that is going to cost and is going to compare it to the cost to them of you being in a nursing home. And if they do not like what they see, so there are some instances where you need so much care, it could be more expensive to be in the community, right? So what happens then? Or what happens if you if you cost them too much in the community, can they force you over into a nursing home? And that was our big question. The answer is no, but, with a very big but, okay? So what happens is there is a actual cost threshold. I'll give you the numbers so you have it. So if you are in, if you're receiving home and community-based services, and they figure out that you need more than $5,800 a month in care, it's $5,844 in case you need the exact detail, then they will say to you, we will not provide you services that exceed that amount. You have two choices. You go into a nursing home, or you agree, you sign a risk statement that says that I understand that Medicaid thinks I need more than that amount of care, but I am not going to get that amount of care, and I'm going to be okay with that, okay? So you'll sign a risk agreement, and then you'll decide of all those services that added up to $6,000 instead of $5,800, which ones you're willing to do without. At that point, what we're finding is, at least you've made a choice, right? You have some choice? No. Providers don't want to be involved in that. The home care agency is not going to take a client that isn't safe, who's not receiving the amount of services that they need. So they say, no way. And that's what we're starting to see now, where we're having people who have more need and they don't want to go into a facility. Then what happens? That they're going to end up in a facility because providers aren't going to want to take that risk. You know, they see it as a liability risk. What happens if it's the reverse? Okay, if the nursing home, which is in most of the case, right? If the nursing home is saying, if you say, I want to go into a nursing home, I want to put my spouse into a nursing home, I want to, you know, be in a nursing home myself, for whatever reason, home is not going to work for me. Medicaid can say, and the managed care can say, sorry. They can say, we're sorry, you must take home and community-based services. The caveat to that is they must provide a plan to show that they can provide for health and safety. So if there's a situation where it is unsafe and you can document that it's unsafe, then they can't force you. But in a lot of times, imagine having to do that, right? That's going to be an appeals process. That's going to be a whole scenario. So while we love the idea of that people are going to be allowed to be at home, really not happy with the idea that people are going to be forced to be at home, where sometimes it's not appropriate. And often it's not appropriate for the social reasons, that it's just not, it's too much on the caregiver, it's too much on the spouse, it's, for whatever reason. What they can't do, I'm going to take them 1 second. What they can't do is they can't force you to move once you started off in a nursing home. So if you were placed in a nursing home now, they can't make you move. They can encourage you to move. They can't make you move. But today, if I'm applying for Medicaid and I'm in the community to start off with, okay, so if I'm already in a nursing home and I've been there and I've spent down and now I'm going to apply for Medicaid, they can't force you to leave where you've been living. But if I'm in the community and I've spent down like your father, they could say, no, it doesn't matter what you're telling me that your dad really should go into a facility. We're going to make sure that he has to stay in the home. So it all becomes all about the numbers. Okay, questions. So the question is, how do they force someone to be in the community if there's no support? Well, they're going to argue that they're going to provide enough services to be able to support that. Now, again, I don't think the they're not going to place somebody who absolutely needs 24-hour support, is up wandering in the middle of the night. That person, they're not going to force into a community because, at least one would hope, right? Because that person really requires a nighttime aid a day, more than 40 hours, more than Medicaid is willing to pay. So that's going to be the saving grace. It's those gray areas. It's those people who do have a spouse in the home, but maybe that spouse can't do it anymore. That's where I think we're going to see the biggest issue here, where they're going to be trying to push people to remain in the community who really, it's time to go into a facility. In theory, you could do it on your own, but do you know what the federal rule is? I mean, that's the problem, right? I mean, for these type of things, it's not, the layers of regulations are so complex that it would be very hard for a layperson to be able to handle themselves. And, often, I have clients come in, well, yes, I appealed to the managed care board and they told me no. Well, that's, and kind of the acceptance of, well, I guess I have to do what they say, as opposed to, carrying through the whole process. Going back to the qualified income trust, are there service fees associated with it? Actually, some banks I've heard are minimal, a $5, minimal amount. And then there would be the same sort of a fees that there would be for any account, because remember, you're not going to have minimums and whatever. So you may have a $6 or a $20 or whatever regular fees that you would have because it's a bank account. But there's no specialized upfront cost in doing it with the bank. When you have a case where there is somebody who's a Medicaid applicant who doesn't have a caregiver and who doesn't have a power of attorney, even if they have a caregiver, if they do not have a power of attorney, they do not have a legal guardian, and they themselves don't have the capacity to contract, to sign a trust, okay? In that case, someone is going to have to bring a guardianship in order to set this trust up. It is likely going to be, in that kind of scenario, it's either going to be the facility or it's going to be some family member who doesn't have a power of attorney, or some friend that doesn't have a power of attorney, but knows that they're not able to do this. So yeah, I mean, we already see guardianships being started for the purpose of doing Medicaid applications. There was a whole article in the New York Times about that happening in New York, guardianships for the purpose of collecting nursing home bills. But you're going to see a lot, I think, of guardians where people think how many people don't have the capacity when they are going on to Medicaid. Particularly, that's why they had to do the grandfathering, right? Because otherwise, what were they going to do? You've got 80% of residents in a nursing home, let's say, don't have capacity. How are you ever you're going to get guardians for every single one of them? No. So they had to grandfather that in, but still, a lot of people they come off. We're talking about how the appeal process works, and it's important to, as soon as you get a notice to respond, that they're going to change services, that you respond immediately, because if you respond immediately, so you'll have 30 days to respond, but if you respond within the first 10 days, then they have to keep your services in place until such time as the appeal process runs through. So it's going to be really important to respond to that immediately, and then you at least don't have that situation of, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I don't know how long this is going to take, and you end up with this major catastrophe. So. The beneficiary, the Medicaid applicant, cannot be the trustee. It must be someone else. And one of the problems with that is obviously that not everybody has one. Not everybody has someone who can step in. First of all, not everybody has a guardian or a power of attorney to create it on the front end. And then not everybody has someone who can step in and handle that task of being trustee. Because even if you have a power of attorney, you have, your great nephew from out of town who is your power of attorney, that person isn't going to want to write those checks every month, So that becomes a whole nother situation where you have to find somebody who's willing to do that and probably not get paid for it. I mean, in theory, they could get up to 6% of the income, so maybe they could get, if it's $3,000, maybe you're going to get $180, but probably not. Probably you're going to get a pittance because it's only after everything is spent down. So you're asking somebody to do a job, then you can't give them any money for. So the question is, for Medicaid eligibility, how do they treat the home? If there is someone who is residing in the home, and that person is a community spouse, a disabled child, then the home will be exempt. If, however, it's somebody else, the home, they won't force someone to move out of it, but they will put a lien. They will attach a lien to the property. And if there's no one in the home, then they will force the sale of the home. So thank you. I hope that this has been useful, and I think we're in sort of for a little bit of a ride, and we'll have to reevaluate. I will tell you that the Elder Law Bar, I'm the chair of the Elder Law, National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys in New Jersey, and we are actively looking and working and pushing the state and describing the problems our clients are advising us. And, so we're really trying to get them to change this and realize the mistakes that they're making as things go along. So, yeah.